As an architect by trade, I found myself in the unusual role of a bride on what was supposed to be the most meticulously crafted day of my life. Each detail of the wedding, from the floral arrangements to the carefully curated playlist for the evening, had been planned to perfection. I had envisioned the day like a scene from a romantic novel where love triumphs over all obstacles. At the altar, my fiancé Tyler, an engineer known for his logical and straightforward demeanor, the perfect counterpart to my creativity, waited with a nervous smile. However, as I walked down the aisle, I noticed a distant look in Tyler's eyes, almost as if he was carrying a burden. I tried to dismiss it as mere wedding jitters, but my sense of unease only deepened when I caught Tyler's mother, Betty, whispering to a neighbor with a scrutinizing look. When our eyes met, she forced a smile and mouthed, "You look beautiful," though her eyes betrayed her insincerity. As the ceremony progressed and the pastor asked Tyler if he took me as his lawful wedded wife, there was a tense pause before he uttered, "I do." His eyes, however, were devoid of the warmth I had always associated with those words. During the ring exchange, Betty stood up and loudly declared the need to capture the moment, her statement sounding more like a caution than a celebration. At the reception, Betty approached me with a sarcastic remark about my unconventional dress, hinting at my supposed defiance of norms. Trying to maintain a light atmosphere, I replied that I saw weddings as a celebration of love and felt no need to adhere strictly to tradition. Tyler's attempt to defuse the tension, although comforting, seemed tinged with resignation, unbecoming of such a celebratory occasion. As we began our first dance, Tyler and I moved together mechanically, our bodies close, but our spirits miles apart. The song that was meant to be an anthem of our love now seemed ironic, and when Tyler asked if I was ready for forever, the space between us felt vast and uncertain. I responded affirmatively, hoping against hope that the dark cloud looming over us would soon lift. What I didn't realize was that this was merely the prelude to a series of challenges that would not only test our marriage, but also force me to confront the very essence of who I was. The feeling that something had already ended persisted, even as everyone toasted to our new beginning. After the wedding, returning to our cozy 4-bedroom home, a place meant to be our sanctuary, felt more like stepping into an uncertain future. However, the walls I once believed would safeguard our happiness began to feel like the bars of a prison, setting the stage for ongoing domestic strife. The subtle invasion by Betty, my mother-in-law, started with her frequent, unexpected visits and incessant criticisms. This culminated shockingly when she announced she would be moving in with us indefinitely, taking over the cozy reading nook I cherish so much. My heart sank as I looked desperately at Tyler, hoping he would stand up for our space. I pulled Tyler aside, my voice trembling with emotion. "This is our home, Tyler. Shouldn't we have talked about this before making such a decision?" He met my gaze, but the warmth and love that had shone in his eyes just months before seemed to have vanished. "Mom's getting older, Betty. She shouldn't be alone. She should be with family," he reasoned, emphasizing family in a way that made me feel excluded. "So I'm not family?" I asked, feeling a painful sting as tears welled up. "You know that's not what I mean," he responded, his tone one of frustration. "But Mom has done so much for me. I owe her this." "What about what we owe each other?" I countered. "We just got married, Tyler. This is supposed to be our time to grow together, not accommodate your mother." However, my pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. The decision was unilateral. My feelings, opinions, and sense of home no longer matter. With that, Betty moved in, and what was once a love nest transformed into a battleground of egos and tensions. Every room felt oppressive, suffocated by her overbearing presence. The quiet corners where I once read peacefully were now gone, as were the tender moments I used to share with Tyler. I found myself not just fighting to save my marriage or reclaim my home, but battling for my own identity, dignity, and peace of mind. The recurring thought haunted me. How did it come to this? How did my life and choices become secondary to someone else's whims? My once tranquil reading nook was now cluttered with Betty's belongings. The kitchen became a stage for her critiques, and my husband, the man I thought I'd grow old with, seemed like a stranger aligned with the opposition. And this was only the beginning. If I thought life was tough before, it was nothing compared to the nightmare that ensued. The atmosphere at home grew increasingly oppressive, as if the walls were literally closing in on me. Amid this escalating tension, the sight of 2 blue lines on a pregnancy test in my trembling hands should have been a moment of joy, a cherished occasion. Yet, under these circumstances, the news of my first pregnancy felt overshadowed by the daunting reality of our domestic life. Standing before the bathroom mirror, with eyes reddened from holding back tears, I realized the pregnancy milestone had become a heavy burden. When I shared the news with Tyler, his reaction was disappointingly indifferent. "Well, that's something," he muttered, quickly diverting the conversation to a home improvement idea his mother had proposed. Betty, however, embraced my pregnancy as if it were her divine calling. She started dictating everything from my diet to my daily activities, and even the hospital where I should give birth. Her interference didn't end with just advice. She made my pregnancy another battleground for her psychological dominance. "You're eating again?" she would remark, eyeing the modest sandwich I had prepared. "Shouldn't you be careful about gaining weight during pregnancy?" I retorted, trying to remain calm. "This is doctor recommended, Betty." She scoffed. "Doctors these days don't know anything. Back in my day, we knew how to manage pregnancies." As the weeks dragged on, my energy dwindled, but Betty's demands escalated. She transformed my home into her kingdom, commanding me to clean, cook, and cater to her whims as if I were a servant, not a pregnant daughter-in-law. "Betty, why haven't you vacuumed the living room yet?" She'd bark from her self-assigned throne in my former reading nook, now her lair for endless phone scrolling and daytime TV watching. "I've been feeling really tired today, Betty. The doctor advised me to take it easy," I replied, my voice saturated with exhaustion. "Tiredness during pregnancy isn't an illness, you know," she retorted. Through all this, Tyler's silence was as loud as ever, his passive compliance adding to the tension. The situation boiled over during a tense dinner when Betty criticized my choice of baby names. "That's a ridiculous name for a child. You might as well pin a kick me sign on his back for his entire school life," she sneered. At my breaking point, I snapped back. "Enough is enough, Betty. This is my child and I have a say in how to raise him or her." Her eyes flared with anger as her voice escalated. Tyler finally intervened, but not in my support. "Betty, you're being emotional. Mom's just giving her opinion," he said. Looking from Tyler to Betty and then around the house that had become my prison, I felt trapped, humiliated, and utterly isolated. The reflection in my tarnished wedding ring showed a woman I barely recognized, a woman who was gradually losing everything that once defined her. I had once cherished my home, my dignity, and my relentless spirit. However, those values were relentlessly eroded under the strain of continuous conflict. It was during one such family discussion that Betty, with a cold and triumphant tone, looked me straight in the eyes and declared, "If you can't handle a simple family discussion, maybe you shouldn't be a part of this family." Tyler's silence at that moment was deafening, and it sliced through me more painfully than any spoken word ever could. I suddenly realized that my nightmare was not impending. It had already enveloped me, turning my life into an unrecognizable labyrinth of broken dreams and stifled cries. I wandered through the house like a ghost, where each room echoed the absence of the warmth it once held. The baby growing inside me became my sole beacon of hope, the last shred of joy in a life that felt increasingly hollow. Yet, even this small solace was under threat. The breaking point arrived on a frigid evening during one of those dreadful family dinners, which were always thick with tension. I had labored for hours over a meal, anticipating Betty's inevitable criticism. Each of her critiques struck like a sharp jab. Every scoff felt like a slap. I braced myself for her usual disparagement, but this time her words cut deeper than ever. "You think you're fit to be a mother if you can't even manage a household? What are you going to do with a baby?" Betty sneered at each word, a piercing attack on my already fragile self-esteem. My hands shook and tears blurred my vision, but before I could respond, Tyler chimed in, solidifying my despair. "Mom has a point, Betty. You need to step it up. We're going to be parents soon." That was the last straw. A surge of anger mixed with years of accumulated resentment and humiliation coursed through me. "Step it up? Step it up!" I exclaimed, my voice filled with a fierce intensity that even I hadn't expected. "I am carrying our child, managing our house, and enduring relentless emotional abuse from your mother, and you tell me to step it up?" Both Tyler and Betty looked taken aback by the force of my outburst. At that moment, the reality of my situation was stark and unyielding, laying bare the profound isolation and disrespect I faced daily within what was supposed to be the sanctuary of my own home. The tension inside me had built up like a dormant volcano, and finally it erupted. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore," I declared, my voice breaking under the strain. "I won't raise my child in a place where their mother is treated like nothing. If this is what family is to you, then I want no part of it." With those words, I left the dinner table, leaving Tyler and Betty in stunned silence. I quickly packed a small bag, my hands shaking so much that I struggled with the simple action of turning the doorknob. It was then that Betty decided to strike what she thought would be her final blow. "Where do you think you're going? This is Tyler's house, not yours," she sneered. I turned to face her, meeting her gaze firmly. "Actually, Betty, this house is mine. I bought it, and I have every right to decide who stays and who leaves." "Betty, don't do this. Let's talk about it," Tyler implored, his voice desperate, finally grasping the gravity of the situation. "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied, tears streaming down my cheeks as I opened the door to the cold night outside. As I stepped out, I felt the finality of the moment. The door closing behind me seemed to signify the end of a prolonged, tragic chapter in my life. I started walking. Each step away from that house was painful yet necessary. I didn't know where I was headed, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of agency over my fate, despite the high emotional cost. The icy wind cut through my thin clothes as I wandered the deserted streets, the cold biting into my skin as sharply as the turmoil inside me. I walked, lost in a daze of emotional and physical exhaustion, until I nearly reached my parents' house, a haven I desperately needed. Just steps away from safety, my foot caught on an uneven slab of pavement, sending me tumbling to the ground, my ankle twisting in pain. The physical pain was sharp, but it paled in comparison to the emotional pain I was enduring. Limping and tearful, I finally made it to my parents' doorstep. Their shocked expressions upon opening the door mirrored the severity of my ordeal. This breakdown was a long overdue fracture in a life that had already endured too many pressures. As they hurried me to the hospital, I was painfully aware that changes were necessary. I couldn't return to that house, not to Tyler, and certainly not to a life overshadowed by Betty's oppressive presence. Reaching my breaking point wasn't just the end, it marked a new beginning, a harsh but essential step towards regaining the life that had been slowly stripped away from me. Hospital rooms, with their sterile walls and the constant beeping of machines, have a stark way of thrusting reality upon you. Lying there with my sprained ankle propped up and undergoing checks for any complications from the fall, I experienced a blend of relief and fear. My parents stood by, their faces a mix of concern and quiet anger about the ordeal I had endured. They had always sensed something was amiss in my marriage, but the full extent of its dysfunction was now glaringly obvious. "Sweetheart, what are you going to do now?" my mom asked, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was laden with concern. I don't know, Mom, but what I do know is that I can't go back. Not now, not ever, I responded, my voice surprisingly steady. My dad, who had been pacing back and forth, stopped and faced me. Your mother and I will support whatever decision you make, but you need to think about your future and the future of your child, he advised. I nodded, my mind already a labyrinth of potential scenarios, each filled with uncertainty but also flecked with the promise of newfound freedom. As we spoke, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Betty, where are you? We need to talk. Without hesitation, I turned off my phone. Whatever Tyler had to say, it was too little, too late. I was done with discussions. It was time for actions that spoke louder than any words could. My first act was a decisive one. I called a family lawyer. With my parents beside me, we discussed divorce proceedings, child custody, and alimony. There was a chillingly clinical aspect to dissecting a failed relationship in legal terms, but it also filled me with a sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was taking control of my life, making decisions that prioritized my well-being and that of my unborn child. A week later, Tyler and Betty were served with divorce papers. This step wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my independence and laying the groundwork for a future where I could breathe freely, unencumbered by the shadows of a toxic relationship. Along with the divorce papers, my lawyer filed a notice of eviction against Tyler and Betty from the house that was legally mine. Additionally, the paperwork included demands for substantial child support payments and compensation for the emotional turmoil I had endured. These measures were severe, yet essential, a firm severance of the toxic ties that had bound me for too long. When I eventually turned my phone back on, it was flooded with messages and missed calls from Tyler. Betty, please, can we talk about this? I didn't realize how bad things had gotten, one message read, followed by another. I'm sorry, Betty, I never wanted any of this to happen. Let's find a way to make it right. For a moment, I was tempted to respond, to hear him out. But then, memories of the countless nights filled with humiliation, years of emotional neglect, and Betty's relentless cruelty, all tacitly condoned by him, resurfaced. Any lingering affection was now buried beneath the debris of our shattered marriage. Resolutely, I deleted the messages, erased his number, and blocked him on all social media platforms. As far as I was concerned, Tyler was now a chapter of my past, a painful narrative I was ready to conclude. I was aware that the road ahead would be fraught with its challenges. Divorce proceedings are inherently complex, particularly when a child is involved, but for the first time in a long while, I felt in control of my destiny. It was a painful journey, yet one that steered me away from the engulfing darkness and toward a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of something better. The courtroom had that distinct sterile chill, typical of places where futures and fates are decided in an instant. My lawyer sat next to me, exuding confidence with a stack of documents at the ready. Behind me, the moral support from my parents was palpable. Across the room, Tyler sat, his expression one of defeated bewilderment, with Betty beside him, her face set in a mask of indignant disbelief. All rise, the bailiff announced, and Judge Anthony entered the room. The divorce proceedings unfolded like a whirlwind. Lies were exposed, a barrage of facts and accusations were laid bare before the court. As evidence of Betty's abusive behavior and Tyler's neglect was presented, I watched their faces distort, perhaps for the first time seeing themselves through the eyes of the law. As the judge addressed Betty, the gravity of the situation settled over the courtroom. Mrs., you stand accused of emotional abuse and harassment. The evidence presented against you is overwhelming. How do you plead? With her usual confidence absent, Betty faltered, her response tinged with desperation. Your Honor, this has all been taken out of context. I was merely looking out for my son's well-being. The judge, unimpressed, quickly retorted, It appears your definition of well-being is quite twisted. After a brief yet intense review, Judge Anthony delivered the verdict. The court hereby grants Betty a full divorce from Tyler. Custody of the unborn child will be awarded solely to Betty. Tyler, you are required to pay child support as determined by the state, and Mrs. Betty, given the extensive evidence of your emotional abuse and harassment, you are fined $300,000 for your actions. A wave of relief washed over me as the gavel came down, but it was a bittersweet victory. My marriage had ended, not with dramatic confrontations, but through the quiet shuffling of legal documents. I was free, but the cost was more than I could have ever anticipated on my wedding day. As we exited the courtroom, Tyler approached me, his expression one of confusion and regret. "Betty, I'm so sorry. I never thought we'd end up here," he said, his voice laden with sorrow. Looking at him, the man I once believed I would spend my entire life with, I felt nothing but an empty void where love once resided. "I didn't think so either, Tyler, but here we are. It's too late for apologies now," I replied, turning my back on him and walking away. Betty attempted to catch my eye as I passed, perhaps seeking acknowledgement or even forgiveness, but I offered her none. She had drained too much from me. I couldn't afford her the satisfaction of seeing that she still had any effect on me. Stepping out of the courthouse, the world seemed brighter and more vivid, as if I were seeing everything through a new lens, no longer clouded by constant anxiety and emotional turmoil. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one that I would write on my terms. My mother embraced me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Betty. You're free." I hugged her back, overwhelmed with gratitude. "I couldn't have gone through this without you and Dad," I replied. Together, we walked into the light of a new day, ready to start anew, free from the shadows of the past. "We'll always be here for you," my dad said as he joined in the group hug, his voice steady and reassuring, "and for your new beginning." That evening, I sat alone in the quiet of my house, the house that was now undeniably mine, and felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. Although I was alone, I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in years, the only expectations I needed to meet were my own. There was still a hint of apprehension about the challenges ahead. After all, I was about to become a single mother, a role brimming with responsibilities. Yet, as I rested a hand on my belly, feeling the gentle kicks of my unborn child, a sense of calm certainty settled within me. This painful journey had brought me to a significant reckoning. While scars from the past remained, they now marked a tale of survival rather than defeat. I was ready for whatever the future held, not out of necessity but from a place of choice. And that choice, to steer my own life, to shape my destiny, made all the difference. It was the promise of a new chapter, one written with hope, resilience, and newfound freedom.